What if the ground beneath your feet remembered? What if a piece of land could hold a grudge, could defy every law we use to make sense of our world? What if the most meticulously observed place on Earth is also the most profoundly, dangerously wrong? This is Verified Nightmare, where every story is a case file, where every detail is cross-referenced, where we do not deal in superstition, but in documented anomaly. Tonight, we venture into the most scientifically studied paranormal hotspot in history, a ranch encompassing approximately 512 acres of northeastern Utah, surrounded by the Uinta Basin. To the public, it is known as Skinwalker Ranch. To the teams of researchers, physicists, and security personnel who have occupied it for decades, it is simply the property. Its history is not one of ghost stories, but of a persistent, intelligent, and often hostile phenomenon that has been witnessed by law enforcement, aerospace engineers, and military intelligence officials. Declassified reports from the Pentagon's own Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program confirm the ranch was a primary focus of study for years. The accounts you are about to hear are not campfire tales. They are incident reports. They are backed by sensor data, corroborated eyewitness testimony, and official logs. This is a chronicle of a war of understanding, fought on a quiet stretch of ranchland where the rules of reality are merely suggestions. For the next several hours, we will present 11 of the most disturbing, verified events from the history of Skinwalker Ranch. Each story is a piece of a puzzle that, to this day, refuses to form a complete picture. If you are new to this channel, understand this. What we document here is not for entertainment. It is evidence. Hit subscribe and tap the notification bell, because the truth is not only stranger than fiction, it is often waiting just outside your door, in the silence between the clicks of a Geiger counter. Our first story begins not with a bang, but with a disappearance. A simple, mundane task that ended with the loss of time, space, and sanity. This is Incident Report 1, the 30-Mile Canyon. The 30-Mile Canyon. Michael Evans was a pragmatic man, a former aerospace technician hired by the new research team as a groundskeeper and general handyman in the early 2000s. His job was to fix fences, maintain equipment, and be a set of reliable eyes on the physical property. He kept a meticulous digital logbook on a ruggedized PDA, noting everything from broken gate hinges to weather patterns. He was a skeptic, brought in precisely because he had no belief in the paranormal, only in what his tools and his senses could confirm. On the morning of October 11, 2003, his task was straightforward. A motion sensor camera, a high-end unit used for wildlife tracking, had malfunctioned at a post near the eastern boundary of the property, an area marked by a deep, rugged ravine locally known as the 30-Mile Canyon. The team had reviewed the camera's last transmission, a burst of distorted, gray static, and wanted it retrieved for diagnostics. Michael packed a toolkit, a GPS unit, a two-way radio, and a bottle of water. The hike was estimated at 45 minutes each way. He signed out at the main security desk at 8:07 a.m. The day was clear, cold, and utterly normal. He found the camera without issue. It was mounted on a steel post, its lens pointed across the canyon. As he unscrewed the mounting bracket, he noted the silence. It was not merely an absence of sound, but an aggressive void. No wind, no distant birds, not even the hum of insects. He shrugged it off as a high-pressure weather effect, noted the time in his log 9:22 am, and began the return trek. That's when the GPS unit failed. The screen didn't flicker or display an error. It simply went blank, as if the battery had been surgically removed. He tapped it, switched it off and on. Nothing. Annoyed, he pulled out his radio. Base. This is Evans. My GPS just died. No fault lights. Proceeding on visual bearing back to the north fence line. Only static answered him. Not the white noise of a dead channel, but a peculiar, thick silence from the speaker. He checked the power indicator. It showed full charge. He tried again. Base. Do you copy? The silence from the radio felt attentive. Michael was not prone to panic. He oriented himself using the position of the sun and began walking. After 20 minutes, he should have crested a ridge that gave a clear view of the main operations building. Instead, he found himself standing at the edge of the 30-mile canyon again. Not the same spot, the geography was different. The rock faces sharper, but unmistakably the same canyon. He was certain he'd been walking in a straight line away from it. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He tried the radio again. This time, the static broke, and a voice emerged, tinny and distant. It was his own voice, saying, "Base, this is Evans. My GPS just died." He dropped the radio as if it were hot. The device hit the dirt, the voice cutting off. He retrieved it with trembling hands. Now, it was just dead, completely unresponsive. He looked at his watch. The digital display was a scrambled mess of symbols. His PDA was similarly corrupted, the log entries he'd made that morning replaced by lines of gibberish. The sun, overhead, seemed fixed in place. No movement, no change in the angle of the shadows. The aggressive silence pressed in on his eardrums. For what felt like hours, he walked. He marked his path with cairns of stone. He would walk for 30 minutes, turn around, and find the cairns missing, or rearranged into patterned circles, arrows pointing back the way he came. The canyon was always there, a constant scar in the landscape, no matter which direction he traveled. He was a technician, a man of logic, and his tools had betrayed him. The landscape itself had become a prison of non-Euclidean geometry. The breaking point came when he saw the figure. On the opposite rim of the canyon, perhaps 300 yards away, a tall, bipedal shape stood silhouetted against the unchanging sky. It was impossibly thin, with elongated limbs, and it did not move. It simply watched. Michael felt a primal terror, a certainty that this was not an animal, not a man. It was an observer, and in that moment of sheer dread, he heard a new sound, the distant, welcome roar of a diesel engine. He turned, and the figure was gone. The sun unfroze, sliding perceptibly toward the west. The sounds of the world rushed back in a gust of wind, the cry of a hawk. He crested a ridge and saw a research team's truck bouncing along a familiar fence line. He stumbled toward it, waving his arms. According to the official security logs, Michael Evans was gone for 1 hour and 14 minutes. His own subjective experience was of being lost for over 6 hours. The team in the truck reported finding him in a state of severe dehydration and shock, despite the cool weather and his full water bottle. His digital watch and PDA were permanently fried, their internal circuitry fused in a way the team's electrical engineer later described as consistent with an intense, localized electromagnetic pulse, but without the accompanying heat damage. The GPS unit, however, functioned perfectly when tested back at the lab. The radio's memory chip was blank, all logs erased. The camera he retrieved was sent for analysis. The final image on its memory card was not static. It was a clear, time-stamped photograph taken at 9:21 a.m., 1 minute before Michael noted his retrieval. The photo showed the canyon, the post, and the back of a man's head as he reached for the camera. That man was Michael Evans, and standing directly behind him, slightly out of focus but unmistakable, was the same tall, thin figure, its head tilted, as if looking over his shoulder at the camera lens. The case file, signed by the project director, concludes, event categorized as a class, a spatial anomaly. Witness reliability high. Physical evidence inconclusive but suggestive. No further solo expeditions into the eastern sector authorized. Michael Evans resigned 2 weeks later. He never spoke publicly about the details, bound by a strict non-disclosure agreement, but in a private debriefing transcript, one line is underlined: it wasn't lost. The land moved, and something was there to make sure I knew it was watching. The imposter. Dr. Eleanor Shaw was a bioscientist, part of a multidisciplinary team brought to the ranch in the summer of 2010. Her focus was environmental sampling, analyzing soil, water, and air for any biological anomalies. She was a woman of intense focus, known for her precise methodology and her dry, academic sense of humor. She shared a double-wide trailer lab with her colleague, Mark, a geologist. Their workspace was a cluttered sanctuary of microscopes, spectrometer readouts, and sample trays, smelling faintly of chemicals and dry earth. The incident began on the night of July 22nd. Eleanor was working late, cataloging a series of soil cores that exhibited strange magnetic fluctuations. Mark had retired to his on-site bunk an hour earlier. The security system for their trailer was simple but effective: a magnetic sensor on the main door, logged to a central server, and a physical deadbolt. At 11:34 p.m., according to the security log, the door sensor was triggered. The internal motion detectors, however, registered no movement. Eleanor, engrossed in her data, heard nothing. It was the smell that alerted her. Not a foreign smell, but a familiar one: Mark-specific brand of sandalwood soap, mixed with the faint, ever-present scent of sulfur from the local water. She looked up, expecting to see him having returned for something. The lab was empty. She called out, "Mark, you forget your keys again?" No answer. She checked the door. It was dead-bolted from the inside, exactly as she had left it. She dismissed it as a draft triggering the sensor and the power of suggestion. The next night, it happened again. Sensor trigger at 11:34 p.m. precisely. No motion. This time, she was in the small attached kitchenette, making tea. She heard a voice. It was Mark's voice, clear as day, coming from the main lab. It said, "Ellie, can you hand me the pH calibrator?" The request was perfectly normal, the use of her nickname correct. But Mark was in town for supplies, a fact she had confirmed with security at dinner. Her blood went cold. "Mark?" she said, her voice steady but firm. "Is that you?" "It's me," the voice replied, sounding slightly annoyed, perfectly mimicking his cadence. "Who else would it be?" "The calibrator is over by your station." Eleanor did not move. She reached slowly for the heavy-duty flashlight kept by the sink. "You're in Vernal. You left at 1800 hours. There was a long pause. Then, the voice came again, but the tone had changed. The familiar warmth was gone, replaced by a flat, hollow quality. "No, right here." She stepped into the doorway of the lab, flashlight raised. The room was empty. The chairs were tucked in. The equipment hummed softly. A cold draft seemed to emanate from the center of the room, though the vents were still. On her primary computer monitor, a single line of text had been typed into a blank document, as if by an invisible hand. "Let me in." Security was called. A sweep of the trailer and its perimeter found nothing. The door sensor log was verified it had triggered. The motion logs were verified they had not. The security chief noted in his report a temperature drop of 15 degrees in the lab at the time of the event, recorded by environmental monitors. Eleanor requested, and was granted, a temporary change of sleeping quarters to the main bunkhouse. The phenomenon, however, had attached itself. 2 nights later, in the secure women's wing of the bunkhouse, Eleanor was awakened by a knock on her door. A voice, Mark's voice, whispered through the steel. "Ellie, I'm back. Let me in. It's cold out here." She lay paralyzed, staring at the door. The security camera in the hallway, reviewed later, showed the empty corridor. The audio feed, however, captured the whisper. VoicePrint analysis, detailed in an appendix to the main report, concluded a 94% match to Mark's voice, but with the noted digital artifacts and spectral gaps inconsistent with natural speech production. The final encounter was the most brazen. Eleanor, determined not to be driven from her work, began conducting all field sampling in pairs and during daylight hours. While collecting water samples from a creek on the property's western edge, her partner, a security officer, received an urgent radio call to respond to a tripped sensor on the opposite side of the ranch. He hesitated. Eleanor, feeling exposed but rational, insisted he go. "It's broad daylight," she said. "I'll be finished here and walk straight back to the main road." 10 minutes. As soon as the utility vehicle disappeared over the hill, the silence descended. The babbling creek seemed to mute itself. Eleanor hurriedly capped her last sample vial. When she stood up and turned, he was there. 20 feet away, standing at the tree line, was Mark. Or something wearing Mark's face, his clothes, his posture. It smiled his familiar lopsided smile. But the eyes were wrong. They were dark, too reflective, like the eyes of an animal caught in a spotlight. It raised a hand in a casual wave. "Hey, Ellie," it said. The voice a perfect copy. "Found some interesting shale over here. Want to see?" Every instinct screamed at her. This was not her collie. This was a lure. The thing took a step forward, its movement fluid but somehow off, as if it wasn't entirely comfortable with the shape it was wearing. Eleanor did not run. She knew running could trigger a predator's chase instinct. She slowly, deliberately, slung her sample pack over her shoulder, maintaining eye contact. "I have all I need, Mark," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'll meet you back at the lab." She began walking backwards, step by careful step, toward the open field that led to the road. The thing's smile never wavered. It watched her, head tilted. As she reached the edge of the tree shadow and stepped into the full sun, the figure took one more step forward, but stopped at the precise line where the shadow ended. It would not enter the sunlight. "Another time, then," it called, its voice suddenly carrying a strange, harmonic resonance, like two voices speaking in unison. She turned and walked, not looking back, until she reached the gravel road. The security truck found her 5 minutes later, pale and shaking but in control. The real Mark was verified to be in the operations center, reviewing core samples, his alibi corroborated by 7 other staff members and time-stamped security footage. The official report filed by the head of security uses the term mimetic entity. It notes that Dr. Shaw's psychological evaluation showed no signs of hallucination or paranoia, and her account was deemed credible. The incident led to the strict enforcement of the buddy system rule, with no exceptions. The final, chilling note in Eleanor Shaw's personal log, excerpted in the file, reads, "It wasn't trying to scare me. It was practicing. It was learning how to be him. The question is, for what purpose?" She completed her contract, but did not renew it. Colleagues noted she never again worked in a field site after dusk, anywhere in the world. The Sherman family were the first to bring notoriety to the property in the 1990s, long before it became a formal research site. Terry Sherman was a rancher, a man whose world was defined by tangible things: cattle weight, fence post depth, the price of feed. In the spring of 1996, he decided to dig a new irrigation pond in a low-lying pasture where the grass always seemed unusually green and lush. He hired a local man with a backhoe. The work was routine for the first few hours, until the machine's bucket hit something solid and metallic, about 8 feet down. Thinking it was an old piece of farm equipment or a geological oddity, Terry climbed into the shallow pit to investigate. What he found was not rock or rusted iron. It was a smooth, curved surface, dark gray in color and cool to the touch despite the sun. It felt like polished stone, but unlike any local geology. He cleared more dirt away, revealing a larger, dome-like structure, approximately 12 feet in diameter, embedded in the earth. Perplexed, he marked the spot and decided to continue the pond a dozen yards to the east. The backhoe operator, a man named Jed, later told investigators he felt a low vibration through the machine's controls when he broke ground near the object, and a smell like ozone after a lightning strike. 2 days later, the cattle refused to enter that pasture. They would approach the gate, become agitated, and then bolt as a herd. This was not normal skittishness. These were calm, familiar animals acting with a unified fear. Terry's wife, Gwen, reported hearing a low-frequency hum at night, a sound that seemed to come up through the foundation of the house, more felt than heard. It gave her persistent migraines. Their teenage son, Bobby, claimed to see strange lights, quick, darting orbs of blue and orange zipping just above the tree line near the dig site at dusk. Terry, ever practical, blamed stress and an overactive imagination. Then the dogs vanished. 2 Australian shepherds, both highly trained working dogs, were let out one evening and never returned. A search found no trace, not even a tuft of fur on a fence. The following morning, however, they were back, sitting on the front porch, perfectly still, side by side. They were physically unharmed, but fundamentally altered. They no longer responded to their names. They would not eat or drink. They would simply stare, for hours on end, at the distant pasture where the strange object was buried. If a person approached them, they would growl, a sound the Shermans described as unlike any canine noise they'd ever heard, deeper, with a strange guttural rasp. After 3 days of this, Terry made the decision to put them down. The local vet who performed the euthanasia noted in his records that the animal's blood work showed highly anomalous electrolyte levels and signs of acute radiation exposure, though he had no source for such exposure. Driven now by a mixture of fear and determination, Terry decided to uncover the object. He needed to know what was on his land. He returned to the site with Jed and the backhoe. The dome-like structure was exactly as they'd left it. Terry brought an industrial-grade hammer drill. He selected a spot near the curve's edge, braced himself, and triggered the drill. The bit did not penetrate. It did not even scratch the surface. The sound it produced was not the grind of stone on metal, but a sharp, deafening shriek that seemed to violate the air itself. Jed, standing 20 feet away, clutched his ears and stumbled backward. Terry dropped the drill, his hands numb from the vibration. In the immediate, ringing silence that followed, they both saw it. The air above the dome wavered, like heat haze on a road. But the day was cool, and within that haze, for just a fraction of a second, a shape resolved. Jed would only ever describe it as a big, black something, like a wing, but not a bird's wing. Terry saw a flash of something massive, leathery, and impossibly deep, as if he were looking into a vertical shaft that went down for miles. That night, the phenomenon became undeniably aggressive. At 2:17 a.m., every light in the Sherman home blew out simultaneously. The phone line went dead. From the direction of the pasture, a deep, subsonic thump began to resonate through the ground, rhythmic, like a giant heartbeat. The windows vibrated in their frames. Then, the sound of something massive moving outside, a crunching of soil, the snapping of wooden fence posts. Terry looked out his bedroom window. In the moonlight, he saw the new irrigation pond, the one dug to the east of the object. The water was draining, not seeping into the ground, but swirling in a perfect, silent vortex, being sucked down a central point that had not existed hours before. And around the edges of the pond, illuminated in the stark moonlight, were footprints. They were bipedal, but elongated, with 3 distinct toes, and they sank nearly 18 inches into the packed earth. The official investigation began the next day, not by local police, but by individuals in unmarked vehicles wearing jackets with a government contractor logo. The Sherman family's statements were taken with clinical detachment. Soil samples were collected. Electromagnetic readings were off the charts. The lead investigator's summary, later obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, is tersely worded. Anomalous subsurface structure confirmed. Active M emissions detected. Property presents a clear and persistent biological hazard. The Shermans sold the ranch for a fraction of its value just weeks later, with a non-disclosure agreement that bound them to silence for decades. The new owners were a shell corporation, which soon granted access to the first team of scientists. The object itself was never excavated. In fact, according to later geological surveys included in the research team's files, the dome was not an object at all in the traditional sense. Seismic and ground-penetrating radar suggested it was the tip of a larger, perfectly smooth, ovoid structure that extended downward for at least 150 feet, its bottom, beyond the reach of their instruments. The report's final, heavily redacted conclusion states, "The hole is not a hole. It is an interface. Recommend permanent, guarded quarantine of the immediate zone." To this day, that zone remains the most heavily monitored and restricted area on the entire property, surrounded by sensors that don't just watch for things coming out, but for anything attempting to go in. The Invisible Predator. Security team leader Tom Gunderson was a former Army Ranger, a man with over 20 years of experience in high-threat environments. He was hired in 2008 to bring order and military-grade procedure to the ranch's security operations. He believed in threats he could see, track, and engage. The stories of orbs and shadows he dismissed as sensor glitches or the product of overactive imaginations in a stressful environment. His domain was the concrete, fence line integrity, camera blind spots, patrol rotations. That changed in the winter of 2009. It began with the livestock. The research team kept a small herd of cattle as both a control group and a kind of living sensor array. Based on the Sherman accounts, the animals were healthy, monitored by tags that tracked vitals and location. On the morning of February 3rd, Gunderson was called to the north pasture. One of the steers was down. It wasn't sick, it was dead. And the manner of its death was unlike anything in his experience. The animal lay on its side in the frost-covered grass. There was no blood on the ground, no signs of a struggle, but the carcass itself was wrong. A precise, circular section of the hide, muscle, and bone on its left flank, about the size of a dinner plate, was simply gone. The edges of the wound were cauterized, smooth and glassy, as if cut and instantly seared by a laser of unimaginable heat. The organs visible inside the cavity were similarly missing sections, parts of the liver, a kidney, a segment of intestine neatly excised. The ground beneath the wound was not burned. The grass was untouched. It was as if the flesh and bone had been teleported out of the animal. The steer's vitals, according to its tag's data dump, showed a sudden spike in heart rate and temperature, followed by an instantaneous, catastrophic flatline at 4:02 a.m. Gunderson ordered a full quarantine of the area. He treated it like a crime scene. He had his team photograph, measure, and collect samples. They found no footprints beyond those of the other cattle, no tool marks in the frozen earth, no traces of chemical accelerants. The necropsy report, filed by a veterinarian contracted to the project, noted the cauterization was surgical in precision and exhibited protein denaturation consistent with exposure to heat exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit applied in a milliseconds-long pulse. The report ended with a bewildered question: what instrument could possibly do this in the middle of an open field? Gunderson increased patrols. He set up motion-activated thermal cameras focused on the livestock enclosure. For 2 weeks, nothing. Then, on the night of February 18th, the Security Command Center's alarms blared. An intrusion had been detected at the main perimeter gate on the western side. Not a breach, but a presence. The gate's seismic sensor, designed to detect attempts to climb or cut it, registered a series of heavy, rhythmic impacts. The external camera showed nothing. The thermal camera showed a faint, shapeless blotch of slightly cooler air pressing against the chain links. As the team watched the monitor, the gate itself began to vibrate, the metal links shaking as if being struck by a powerful, invisible force. Gunderson and 2 of his men responded in a truck, arriving at the gate within 90 seconds. The vibration stopped the moment their headlights swept over the area. The gate was undamaged, but the ground in front of it was different. The hard-packed snow and dirt were imprinted with a series of deep depressions. They were not footprints. They were circular pits, about 8 inches in diameter, pressed into the earth as if by a massive, invisible weight. They formed a trail that approached the gate, stopped, and then led away, fading into nothing after 20 yards. Gunderson got on the radio, his voice tight. "Command, this is Alpha. Intruder is airborne or cloaked. We have physical traces. Initiating track." They followed the depression trail with spotlights. It led to a stand of bare juniper trees. One of the men, using a thermal imager, whispered, "Sir, the trees." Gunderson looked through the scope. The thermal display showed the cold tree trunks, and moving between them, a distortion. It was a man-sized shape of absolute zero, a walking hole in the infrared spectrum, sucking the ambient heat from the air around it. As they watched, it passed close to a tree trunk. Where it brushed against the bark, a patch of wood instantly frosted over, crackling with the sound of freezing sap. "Identify yourself," Gunderson shouted, his service pistol drawn but feeling absurd. The shape paused. It turned. On the thermal screen, it had no features, just a swirling, dark vortex where its head should be. Then, it moved. Not towards them, but straight up. The thermal imager tracked it ascending vertically at incredible speed, until it vanished from range. The next incident was the culmination. A week later, a junior researcher, against protocol, stayed late in an equipment shed near the North Pasture. Gunderson's team was alerted to his absence when he missed a check-in call. A search found the shed door locked from the inside. They had to break it down. The young man was found crouched in a corner, alive, but in a state of profound shock. He was hypothermic, his body temperature dangerously low. He was mumbling a single phrase, over and over. It was hungry. It just stared, and it was hungry. The shed was freezing cold, far colder than the outside air. And on the interior wall opposite the researcher, burned into the steel paneling as if by a welder's torch, was a perfect, negative silhouette of a tall, spindly humanoid form. The outline was detailed. They could make out long, thin limbs, a distended head, and what appeared to be a series of sharp, protruding spines along its back. The steel within the silhouette was cold to the touch, its molecular structure altered, made brittle. Gunderson's final report to the project directors was a masterpiece of strained professionalism. It recommended the immediate installation of layered defense systems, not just motion and thermal, but microwave motion detectors, magnetometers, and audible subsonic emitters. His concluding assessment, a line that would later be cited in Pentagon briefings, read, "The entity, designated Predator class intruder, exhibits intelligent avoidance of standard detection, a capacity for controlled thermal negation, and demonstrates a clear, potentially biological interest in living tissue. It is not a ghost. It is a sophisticated organism with capabilities we do not understand, and it is currently operating inside our perimeter with impunity." Tom Gunderson resigned his post 6 months later. In an exit interview, he stated he could no longer guarantee the safety of his team against a threat he couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't possibly engage. His war, he said, had rules. The thing on the ranch did not. The broadcast intrusion. Lena Petrov was a signals intelligence analyst on loan to the ranch research team from a private aerospace defense contractor in 2012. Her expertise was in electromagnetic spectrum analysis and cryptographic anomalies. She operated from a shielded trailer known as the Vault, filled with spectrum analyzers, software-defined radios, and banks of recording equipment. Her task was to monitor, log, and attempt to decipher any unusual radio frequency or microwave emissions from the property. For the first 3 months, her work was mundane, logging occasional spikes of unexplained RF noise, the oddball radio hem from a neighboring county, the constant hum of cosmic background radiation. That changed on the night of September 9th. At 11:11 p.m. local time, every piece of equipment in the vault simultaneously spiked. A powerful, narrowband signal flooded the 462 MHz UHF band, a frequency used by local emergency services. The waveform was clean, digital, and carried a data payload. Lena's initial assumption was of a jammer or a test from a nearby agency. She began recording and ran a standard decryption algorithm. What resolved on her screen was not scrambled text or numbers. It was a perfect, high-resolution black and white photograph. The image was of a child's bedroom from the 1980s wood paneling, a Star Wars poster, a model airplane hanging from the ceiling. It was utterly mundane, yet profoundly disturbing because it had been broadcast over a radio frequency. The image's metadata, where a date would normally be, contained a string of 9-digit numbers that correlated to no known timekeeping system. Lena reported the anomaly. The security team did a physical sweep of the ranch. No unauthorized personnel, no vehicles, no source for the transmission. The signal ceased as abruptly as it began. The incident was logged as an unsourced data packet of unknown origin. The following night, at 11:11 p.m. precisely, it happened again. Same frequency. This time, the image was of the same bedroom, but from a different angle. The bed was unmade. A single shoe lay in the middle of the floor. Lena felt a deep, personal unease. The images felt intrusive, voyeuristic. She began a deeper analysis, looking for steganography hidden data within the image. She found it. Buried in the pixel data of the shoe was another string of numbers. When plotted on a graph, they formed a perfect sine wave, but one that, according to her software, represented a sound frequency below the range of human hearing. The third night, she was ready. She had a directional antenna array set up to triangulate the signal's source. At 11:11, the broadcast hit. This image showed the bedroom door, slightly ajar, with darkness beyond. The hidden data this time was more complex, a series of mathematical coordinates. They did not correspond to any location on Earth's surface. They were, however, shockingly close to the celestial coordinates of a star system 16 light-years away, a fact Lena verified with an astronomy database after a frantic hour of cross-referencing. As she stared at the result, a new signal overlaid the first. It was an audio stream. A voice, synthesized and flat, began to speak. It did not use words. It recited a string of prime numbers, then switched to reciting the chemical compounds that make up human blood plasma, then to listing the exact GPS coordinates of the vault trailer itself. Lena slammed her hand on the mute button. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The directional antennas had given her a source location. It was not from a distant hill or a passing satellite. The triangulation pointed to a spot 200 yards underground, directly beneath the center of the property, in the general vicinity of the buried hull from the Sherman era. The broadcast, according to her instruments, was emanating from deep within the Earth. The project directors were now intensely interested. They instructed Lena to attempt communication. The next evening, at 11:00 p.m., she set up a transmitter on the same frequency. She sent a simple, binary pulse, a digital handshake. At 11:11, the expected image broadcast did not come. Instead, her entire array was flooded with a massive data dump. Thousands of images, compressed and transmitted in a burst lasting less than 2 seconds. They were all slices of human life. A woman drinking coffee at a kitchen window, a man fixing a car, children playing in a sandbox. But they were wrong. The perspectives were impossible shots from high-end corners, from beneath furniture, from inside closed cabinets. They were the views of a hidden observer. The final image in the burst was new. It was a photograph of the main ranch operations building, taken in daylight, and in an upper window, barely visible, was the silhouette of a person. Lena recognized the profile. It was her. She ran from the vault to the operations building, calling security. They checked the room corresponding to the window in the photo. It was a storage closet, locked from the outside, empty except for cleaning supplies. There was no camera, no vantage point from which that photo could have been taken. The culmination of the broadcast incidents was not an image, but an event. 3 nights later, Lena was monitoring from the vault with the security officer present. At 11:11 p.m., the equipment lit up again. This time, no images. Just the flat, synthetic voice. It spoke a single sentence, clear and slow. Lena Petrov, we see you are analyzing signal source depth. Cease triangulation attempts. The security officer heard it. He reached for his radio. It was dead. The lights in the vault flickered and died, plunging them into darkness lit only by the eerie green glow of battery-backed instrument panels. Then, every screen in the trailer, the spectrum analyzers, the monitors, even the security officer's smartphone flashed the same image simultaneously. It was a live thermal feed. It showed 2 human figures, glowing white with body heat, sitting in the dark trailer. The viewpoint was from the ceiling, down. The image panned slowly, zooming in on Lena's thermal signature. A cursor, like a targeting reticle, appeared over her chest. A line of text scrolled beneath the image. Signal source confirmed. Stand by. In that moment, Lena felt a sensation she would later describe as an ice-cold needle slowly inserted into the center of my brain. A piercing, specific headache, accompanied by a wave of static that filled her ears. She screamed. The security officer, acting on pure instinct, grabbed her and physically dragged her out of the trailer and into the cold night air. The sensation ceased the moment she crossed the threshold. The official report, heavily redacted, classifies this as a directed symmetric assault facilitated by anomalous RF emission. All active broadcasting attempts from the team were halted. Lena Petrov was placed on mandatory leave and underwent a battery of neurological tests, which found no physical damage, but noted unusual theta wave activity consistent with exposure to an extreme, focused M field. The data she collected was encrypted and sent to an off-site server. The final note in the log, written by the project director, states, "The intelligence, whatever its origin or location, is not only aware of our monitoring, it is capable of retaliatory action with frightening precision. It perceives our attempts to locate it as a threat. Recommend shifting all signals intelligence to passive reception only. Do not ping the whole." Lena never returned to field work. She now works in a theoretical research division, studying signals from deep space, a comfortable 93 million miles from the source in the Utah desert. The time slip. Dr. Aris Thorne was a theoretical physicist specializing in temporal mechanics and quantum gravity. He was the ranch's most controversial hire in 2015, brought in to model the spatial anomalies others had reported. He approached the property not as a haunting, but as a loose knot in spacetime. His tool was an array of ultra-precise atomic clocks, synchronized with the U.S. Naval Observatory master clock, and a network of laser interferometers designed to detect minute distortions in the fabric of local reality. He was a man of equations, for whom fear was a variable to be cancelled out of the experiment. In July of 2016, he set up his primary interferometer array in the so-called anomaly zone east of the main house, an area known for compass deviations and fleeting shadow figures. The lasers were set along a 100-meter baseline, their beams meeting in a detector that measured their phase with picometer accuracy. Any stretching or compression of the space between them would show as a shift in the interference pattern. For 2 weeks, the data was a flat-line normal spacetime. On the morning of July 22nd, Aris arrived to download the overnight data. The readout was chaotic. At 3:33 a.m., the interferometer had registered a massive, localized spatial dilation event, a stretch in spacetime itself significant enough, according to his calculations, to theoretically permit a macroscopic object to pass through a microscopic wormhole. It lasted 1.3 seconds. Intrigued, he decided to replicate a passive experiment. He placed a series of simple objects at measured points within the array's zone, a fresh apple on a post, a digital watch set to the master clock, a Geiger counter, and a camera set to take a time-lapse photo every 10 seconds. He activated the system and left for the day. When he returned at dusk, the apple was gone. Not eaten, not disturbed. Gone. The post was bare. The digital watch was running 47 minutes slow. Its internal crystal oscillator somehow degraded. The Geiger counter's log showed a single, massive spike of radiation at 3:33 p.m. that afternoon, coinciding with the daily replication of the early morning event. And the camera had taken one anomalous photograph in its sequence. The photo showed the array site, but the quality was grainy, washed out in a sepia tone, like an old photograph. The sky was wrong, the sun was in a different position, and the clouds were frozen in formations not seen that day. In the center of the frame, where the apple had been, was a figure. It was a man in rugged, late 19th century rancher's attire, worn and dusty. He was turned slightly away, holding his hat in his hands, looking down at the post where the apple had been. He appeared solid, real. Aris checked the camera's metadata. The timestamp was correct for 3 hours 33 minutes and 1 second p.m. But embedded in the image file was another, ghost timestamp, a string of numbers that, when decoded, pointed to a date in September 1894. Aris was electrified. This was not a ghost. This was potential evidence of a temporal overlap. He hypothesized a thin spot, a recurring bubble where past and present briefly touched. He designed a more daring experiment. He would place a modern object, a small, brightly colored plastic child's toy, a simple red duck, in the exact epicenter of the dilation coordinates. He would also leave a period-correct artifact, a silver Morgan dollar coin from 1890, in the same spot. His theory was that if the bubble opened, objects might be exchanged. He placed the items on a small, white-painted platform under a weatherproof dome. He set up a high-speed camera filming at 10,000 frames per second, focused on the platform. He synchronized it with his atomic clock and the interferometer. Then, he waited in his observation truck, 100 yards away. At 3:33 p.m., the interferometer spike occurred. The high-speed camera triggered. On his monitor, Aris watched the real-time feed. For 1 second, the air above the platform shimmered like a heat mirage. The red duck and the silver coin blurred. And then, for 3 frames 3/10,000ths of a second, a different scene was superimposed over the platform. He saw dry, cracked earth, a different arrangement of scrub grass, and a hand, a human hand, reaching into the frame. When the shimmer vanished, the platform held 2 objects. The silver dollar was gone. In its place was a rusted, hand-forged iron nail. The red duck remained. Aris rushed to the platform. The nail was cold and pitted with age, but it was the duck that stopped him dead. It was no longer bright red. It was faded, as if by decades of harsh sunlight, and clutched in its tiny plastic beak was a small, carefully folded piece of yellowed paper. With trembling hands, Aris unfolded it. The paper was brittle, the writing in a faded brown ink, in a cursive script. It read, "I know not what sorcery this is." The shining silver wheel came from the air. "I leave this nail, forged by my father. If you are a spirit, show mercy. The land here is sick. The things in the hills are not animals. They watch from the light that is not light. Do not come here." J. H. Cavendish, 1894. Aris's blood turned to ice. The experiment was a success beyond his wildest dreams, and it was a catastrophe. He had not just detected an anomaly, he had made contact across time, and the contact had warned him. The aftermath was contained but chilling. The ranch's management classified the experiment and its results under the highest secrecy level. The note and the nail were taken for analysis. Forensic analysis of the paper and ink confirmed they were consistent with late 19th century materials. The rust on the nail was aged, and its metallurgy matched hand-forged iron from that period. The faded plastic of the toy duck was analyzed. Polymer degradation experts estimated it had aged the equivalent of 80 to 100 years in a desert environment in the span of 1.3 seconds. Dr. Aris Thorne was removed from field operations. His final report, a dense, reluctant document, concludes with the sobering hypothesis: the anomaly zone is not merely a location where strange things happen. It is a weak point in the chronological structure of the area. Events are not linear here. The past is not sealed. The warning from Cavendish suggests the phenomenon is not new, but intrinsic to the land itself. Our experiments may not be observing the anomaly. We may be aggravating a wound in time. He was reassigned to pure theoretical work, forbidden from further physical experimentation. Colleagues noted he became obsessed with the name J. H. Cavendish. Historical records for the Uinta Basin show a homesteader by that name vanished from his claimed parcel in the autumn of 1894, leaving behind a half-built cabin and no trace. His land claim, according to a faded survey map, overlays almost exactly with the eastern sector of what is now called Skinwalker Ranch. The second shadow. Ryan Chen was a computer vision engineer, part of the 2018 team tasked with upgrading the ranch's surveillance grid to an AI-driven system. His algorithms could differentiate between a coyote, a human, and a stray piece of tumbleweed with 99.8% accuracy. He was a man who trusted data patterns, not gut feelings. His workspace was a bank of monitors in the security command center, streaming thousands of hours of footage from infrared, thermal, and full-spectrum cameras. The anomaly began not with a sighting, but with a statistical error. In reviewing the nightly logs from Camera 14, which covered the old Sherman Homestead Foundation, the AI flagged a recurring classification anomaly. Every night, between 2:15 and 2:20 a.m., the system would detect a human-shaped heat signature, but upon secondary analysis, the signature would fail all biometric templates. Its gait was non-standard. Its thermal profile showed no discernible circulatory heart or lung heat pattern, just a uniform, ambient temperature glow. The AI would default to labeling it unknown biological false positive. Ryan, intrigued by the consistent failure, decided to manually review the raw footage for that 5-minute window. The first night's review showed nothing, just empty pasture, the crumbling foundation stones silvered in moonlight. He was about to dismiss it as a software bug when he saw it, not with his eyes on the main image, but in the data sidebar. The pixel analysis graph showed a faint, coherent shape moving across the screen, a shape the human eye couldn't readily perceive because it perfectly matched the background luminance. It was a hole in the thermal noise, a silhouette walking with a slow, deliberate pace. It had no heat of its own. It was simply a perfect absorber, rendering itself invisible by being exactly as cold as the night air around it. Only the AI's pixel-by-pixel subtraction routine could see it. Ryan called it the Cold Walker. He programmed a special tracker to follow it. For a week, the pattern held. The Cold Walker would materialize from the tree line near the homestead at 2:17 a.m., walk a straight 50-yard path to the center of the foundation, stand motionless for exactly 90 seconds, and then fade back into the tree line. It never deviated. It never interacted with anything. Ryan began to think of it as a recording, a psychic echo imprinted on the land, playing on a loop. His curiosity shifted from observation to interaction. What would happen if the loop was interrupted? On a clear, cold night, he received permission for a limited field test. He placed a large, battery-powered space heater in the center of the Cold Walker's path, set to blast high heat at 2:15 a.m. He also set up a high-resolution thermal camera on a tripod, focused on the spot. He monitored from the command center. At 2:17 a.m., the tracker alerted. The Cold Walker emerged from the trees. It walked its usual path. As it approached the space heater, the thermal camera feed showed something impossible. The walker didn't go around the heat plume. It walked through it, and where the intense infrared radiation hit it, the silhouette didn't warm up. Instead, the heat plume itself was sliced, as if a person-shaped cookie cutter had been pushed through it. A perfect, cold, human-shaped tunnel appeared in the glowing thermal output of the heater for a 3-second span as the entity passed. The heater's internal thermostat spiked, trying to compensate for the sudden, localized loss of energy. Ryan was documenting this bizarre result when his AI tracker pinged a second alert. A second unknown signature. This one was different. It was a hot walker. It appeared on camera 12, on the opposite side of the homestead. It glowed with an intense, internal heat signature, over 120 degrees Fahrenheit, far hotter than a human body. It moved erratically, darting behind trees, then freezing. The AI had no classification for it. Ryan watched, mesmerized, as the hot walker's path began to curve, arcing around the foundation site, moving with clear intention toward the point where the Cold Walker would exit the trees. He realized with dawning horror that he was not watching one loop, but two, and they were about to intersect. He radioed the security patrol, a single officer in a truck near the perimeter. "Charlie, this is command. Do not, repeat, do not approach the homestead site. There are two unknowns converging. Maintain distance and observe," the officer acknowledged. His dashcam and thermal feed were patched into Ryan's console. On the screens, the Cold Walker completed its 90-second stillness and turned to walk back to the trees. Simultaneously, the hot walker broke from cover, moving with sudden, unnerving speed on an intercept course. They met at the edge of the tree line. The feeds went haywire. The thermal camera showed a blinding flash of white static as the extreme hot and extreme cold signatures collided. The dashcam video showed a different phenomenon. For a fraction of a second, the space between two juniper trees rippled, like the surface of a pond struck by a stone. The air itself seemed to fracture, revealing a glimpse of a landscape that was not a twisted, black tree against a crimson sky before snapping shut with a sound the officer described as a giant sheet of canvas being torn. When the system stabilized, both walkers were gone, but they had left evidence. The grass where they had intersected was altered. In a perfect circle 10 feet in diameter, the grass was dead and bleached white, frozen solid. At the circle's center, the grass was blackened and smoldering, reduced to ash. The pattern was a perfect yin-yang of absolute cold and intense heat. The official report, co-authored by Ryan and the head of security, postulated the existence of complementary temporal or dimensional phantoms, possibly representing energy states separated by a membrane of local spacetime, The recommendation was to cease all active interference with recurring phenomena. They may be self-contained, Ryan wrote. Our intervention may have caused a containment breach, however brief. The aftermath was subtle but persistent. Camera 14 no longer detects the cold walker loop. It has stopped. But camera 12 now occasionally picks up the erratic hot walker signature in various locations, never following the same path twice. It appears to be loose. Furthermore, since that night, several members of the night security team have reported a new sensation. They describe it as a sudden, intense wave of déjà vu, accompanied by the fleeting perception of a double in their peripheral vision, a shadow that mimics their movement for a half step before vanishing. Ryan Chen Yi's final entry in the project log states, "We may not have just observed an anomaly. We may have successfully enticed two parts of a broken whole to recombine, if only for a moment. And in doing so, we might have taught something how to look for its other half in us." The Unfound Room. Maya Flores was an architect and structural engineer hired in 2019 to assess the integrity of the ranch's older buildings, particularly the original 1932 ranch house that served as the team's administrative hub. She was methodical, working from original blueprints which were incomplete, and building her own 3D laser scans of the structure. Her job was to find load-bearing weaknesses, pest damage, and potential structural faults. She found a discrepancy instead. According to the incomplete blueprints, the ranch house's eastern wing had a simple, rectangular layout, a hallway with 2 bedrooms on one side, and a bathroom on the other. Her first laser scan, however, showed a slight but undeniable bulge in the exterior wall on that wing. The interior scans showed the hallway walls were straight. The math didn't add up. There was a space, approximately 4 feet wide, unaccounted for between the back wall of the northern bedroom and the exterior siding. The blueprints showed nothing but solid framing. She assumed it was a sealed-up chimney flue or an old insulation gap. She asked the facilities manager, an older local named Hal, about it. He shrugged. "That old place has more patches than original cloth. Probably just a dead space they boarded over." But Maya, compelled by professional rigor, needed to be sure. She obtained permission to make a small, exploratory bore hole from the northern bedroom closet, which backed onto the mystery space. She set up her drill with the fine bit, designed to make a clean, pencil-sized hole for an endoscopic camera. She marked the spot on the closet's back wall, based on her scans. She began to drill. The bit chewed through drywall and lathe, then hit something solid. Not wood framing, something metallic and thick. She switched to a more powerful bit. After several minutes of grinding, she broke through. A rush of air sighed from the whole air that was dry, stale, and carried a faint, acrid smell of ozone and old paper. She inserted the endoscope camera. The monitor flickered to life, showing a grainy, green-hued image from the camera's internal light. She was looking into a narrow room. The walls were not plaster, but riveted metal, like the interior of a ship or an old vault. The floor was dusty concrete, and the room was not empty. Against the far wall stood a metal desk, and in front of it, a wooden office chair. On the desk sat a bulky 194OS era radio transceiver, its dials covered in dust. A single sheet of paper lay next to it. A military-style olive drab coat was draped over the back of the chair, as if someone had just stepped away. Maya reported her find immediately. The reaction from the ranch's leadership was swift and intense. She was ordered to seal the hole immediately and to stand by. Within an hour, a specialized team, not the regular security staff, arrived. They wore no insignia. They escorted her from the building and debriefed her in a separate trailer. Their questions were precise and focused on what she had seen, down to the brand name on the radio, the color of the coat, the handwriting on the paper. They were not surprised. They were verifying. Hull, the facilities manager, was quietly let go that same day. His exit interview, glimpsed in a logistics file, cited breach of historical preservation protocols. Maya was granted a heavily supervised return to document the space, under the condition that she not touch anything. The team cut a proper access panel in the closet wall. The room, when they entered, was exactly as the camera had shown. The air was chemically dry, preserved. The radio was a Collins and Arc 5, a model used in World War II aircraft. The sheet of paper on the desk was a log sheet. The entries were in a tight, precise hand. They were not dates and times, but frequencies and alphanumeric codes. The final entry, dated October 31, 1955, read, "Signal source triangulated to subterrane point Delta. Attempted contact per protocol Hydra. Received clear voice response in English. Voice identified itself as the caretaker. It requested coordinates for population centers. Transmission terminated. Recommend immediate quarantine of this frequency and location. Project status, failed. Danger level, extreme." On the wall above the desk, pinned neatly, was a large topographic map of the Uinta Basin. Dozens of red pins marked locations. Several were clustered right on the ranch's property. Blue lines connected some pins, forming strange, non-geometric patterns. Stamped in the bottom corner of the map was a seal Maya recognized from history books, the insignia of the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. The room was a time capsule of a secret government operation that had been active on the property over half a century before the current research team arrived. And they had known about the signals. They had attempted contact, and according to this log, they had gotten an answer. The official explanation given to Maya was that this was a historical curiosity, a leftover from a Cold War signals interception post. But the evidence in the room suggested something far more proactive. The quarantine recommended in the log seemed to have been literal. The room itself had been sealed inside the structure, walled off and forgotten, its failure buried in brick and metal. Maya's final structural report contains a single, telling line appended to her original assessment, discrepancy resolved. Eastern wing contains a sealed, non-structural void of historical significance. Recommend void remain sealed and undisturbed per site heritage guidelines. The room was resealed, this time with a modern, secure panel. Her laser scan files were encrypted, but the discovery had a ripple effect. Cross-referencing the frequencies on the 1955 log with modern signal databases, the team found a match. One of the frequencies, listed as primary contact band, was the exact same 462 MHz frequency that Lena Petrov, years later, would be flooded with images and threats from. The entity calling itself the caretaker in 1955 was likely the same intelligence that warned Lena to cease her triangulation attempts in 2012. It had been aware and active for at least 57 years, longer than anyone had assumed. The unfound room proved one terrifying fact. The phenomenon was not new, and past attempts to understand it had not just failed, but had potentially made things worse. The current team was not the first to listen. They were simply the latest in a line of listeners, working in the shadow of a decades-old failure that had been physically bricked up and forgotten, a silent warning hidden in the walls. The custodian. His name was Walter Briggs, but on the ranch payroll, he was listed simply as custodial and grounds maintenance. He was in his late 60s, a lifelong resident of the Uinta Basin, hired in the early 2000s not for his technical skills, but for his deep, tacit knowledge of the land. He spoke rarely, moved quietly, and observed everything. The researchers saw him as a relic, a quaint local fixture who fixed leaky faucets and mowed the lawns. They did not know he was the ranch's most important and most reluctant censor. Walter's family had ranched in the basin for generations. His grandfather had traded horses with the Sherman family. His own father had warned him off the specific parcel of land long before it had a famous name, calling it bad medicine, and speaking of lights that followed you home, and of cattle that would sometimes be found standing perfectly still dead with no mark on them. Walter took the job because he needed the work, and because a part of him needed to see for himself. He never reported his findings through official channels. He kept a small, leather-bound notebook in the breast pocket of his work shirt. Its entries were not times and dates but observations of the land itself. When the juniper berries withered prematurely on a specific ridge, where the coyotes refused to den. The days the wind blew in a tight clockwise spiral over the eastern pasture despite clear skies. He noticed patterns the scientists with their million-dollar equipment missed because they were looking for radiation and RF signals, not for the land's own subtle language. The incident that brought Walter to the team's serious attention occurred in the spring of 2011. A new biologist, Dr. Evans, was studying insect populations. He'd set pitfall traps, small cups sunk into the ground across the property. After a week, he found the traps in the north sector were consistently empty, not just of insects, but of all life. No spiders, no ants, not even bacteria-laden soil. They were sterile. Puzzled, he asked Walter if he'd seen anyone tampering with them. Walter shook his head, then said quietly, "The ground's cold there. Always has been. Things don't like to live in cold ground." He pointed to a seemingly random patch of sagebrush 50 yards away. "Try there. It'll be warm." Skeptical, but curious, Dr. Evans moved a trap to the indicated spot. The next day, it was teeming with insects, an unusually high concentration, in fact. When he asked Walter how he knew, the old man just tapped the side of his nose. "Smells different, like wet rock and ozone before a storm. That's the warm ground. The cold ground smells like nothing, like air from an old fridge." This piqued the interest of the head of research. They began, discreetly, to interview Walter. They cross-referenced his cold ground and warm ground spots with their sensor data. The correlation was unsettling. His cold ground locations matched areas of persistent, low-level gamma radiation and magnetic anomaly. His warm ground spots often preceded, by 12-24 hours, minor phenomena, orb sightings, equipment glitches. Walter Briggs was a living, walking early warning system. They gave him a dedicated radio and asked him to log his impressions formally. He refused. "The notebook's enough," he said. But he did agree to walk the perimeter with a senior researcher, a geophysicist named Carl, once a week. On one of these walks, in a gully known for compass failures, Walter stopped dead. He knelt, sifting the red dirt through his fingers. He didn't look worried. He looked mournful. "It's angry today," he said. Carl, holding a perfectly functional meter showing no spike, smiled indulgently. "Angry? How can dirt be angry, Walt?" Walter looked up, his eyes clear and sharp. "Not the dirt, the thing under it. It's pushing. Can't you feel it?" He placed his palm flat on the earth, like a heartbeat. Slow, real slow. Carl felt nothing. But that night, at precisely p.m., every piece of electronic equipment in the operations building surged and then went dead for 7 seconds. Security cameras showed the main gate, half a mile away, swinging open and then slamming shut on its own, repeatedly, for those 7 seconds. The gate's motor was burned out. The sensor log for the gully where Walter had made his statement showed a seismic tremor registering 1.7 on the Richter scale at the exact time he placed his hand on the ground. It was a localized tremor undetected by regional geological surveys. Walter's value was now undeniable, and it terrified the leadership. He represented an intuitive, non-technical interface with the phenomenon that they could not calibrate, could not duplicate, and could not control. They increased his pay, gave him a better truck, and asked him gently to share more. He became more withdrawn. The breaking point came during the attempted installation of a new deep ground sensor array near the hole. The drilling rig, a massive vehicle, had broken down 3 times on approach. The crew was frustrated, spooked by minor equipment failures. Walter was observing from the tree line, as was his habit. As the crew finally began to drill the pilot hole, Walter walked over to the site foreman, his face pale. "You need to stop," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's authorized, Walt. We have to get this probe in," the foreman replied. Walter pointed at the drill head. "It's not a probe to them. It's a needle. You're sticking a needle into something, and it's waking up." The foreman, under pressure from his bosses, ordered the drilling to continue. Walter took 3 steps back, turned, and walked swiftly to his truck. He didn't drive away. He just sat, watching, his notebook in his lap. The drill bit reached 50 feet. The sensor on the rig showed a sudden, impossible drop in resistance as if it had hit a cavern. Then, the ground beneath the rig softened. Not gave way, but softened, like quicksand. The 30-ton rig listed to one side, sinking almost 2 feet into what had been solid, dry earth. From the new hole around the drill shaft, a thin, gray mist began to seep out. It didn't drift. It flowed, hugging the ground, moving against the breeze. And it smelled, as Walter had said, of wet rock and ozone. Everyone fled to a safe distance. Walter got out of his truck. He walked toward the mist, ignoring shouted warnings. He stopped at its leading edge, knelt, and did something inexplicable. He spoke, not in English, but in a low, guttural series of syllables that sounded nothing like any known language. He repeated a phrase 3 times. The mist stopped its advance. It seemed to coil in on itself. Then, over the course of 10 minutes, it dissipated, not evaporating upward, but seeming to drain back into the drill hole. The ground firmed up. The rig remained tilted, but stable. Walter stood, walked back to his truck, and left. He did not return to work the next day, or the day after. When the team went to his small cabin in town, they found it empty. He was gone, leaving behind only his furniture and placed neatly on the kitchen table, his leather-bound notebook. The notebook's final entry, dated that drilling day, reads, "They don't want to listen to the land. They want to interrogate it. I spoke the old words my grandfather taught me. The words for sleep and be still. It listened this time, but the voice that answered in my head wasn't grateful. It was curious. It knows my voice now. It's time to go." Walter Briggs vanished. No bank accounts were touched. No family heard from him. His truck was found months later, abandoned in a remote part of the Navajo Nation, keys in the ignition, dust covered. The notebook was analyzed by linguists. The old words he spoke were untranslatable, but phonetic analysis suggested a possible Proto-Uto-Aztecan root language, predating any local indigenous tribe by thousands of years. The project's anthropological consultant noted in a memo, "It is possible the phenomenon has a language, and that certain families in this basin, through long occupation, have retained fragments of it without knowing what it was." Briggs may not have been a custodian of the ranch. He may have been a custodian for it. His disappearance is officially listed as a voluntary termination, but the security logs show that for exactly 1 year after he left, on the anniversary of the drilling incident, the motion sensor at the main gate activated at 3:07 a.m. Each time, the camera showed nothing, but the audio feed, enhanced, picked up a faint, whispering sound, 3 distinct, guttural syllables, matching the phonetic transcription from Walter's notebook. The words for sleep and be still, followed by a 4th, new word. Linguists are still working on its meaning. The working hypothesis is that it is a question, or a name. The recurrence. The data team called it the recurrence. It was not a ghost or a creature, but a statistical impossibility that manifested in the ranch's digital heart. Every system security, research, environmental monitoring was tied into a central server cluster located in a hardened bunker beneath the operations building. Starting in late 2020, the system logs began to show a bizarre error. A specific data packet, exactly 1.3 megabytes in size, would appear at random intervals on the server. It had no point of origin. It was not received from a network input. It would simply materialize in a temporary storage directory. The packet was always identical, a digital ghost. The lead systems analyst, Priya Sharma, was the first to isolate it. The packet was encrypted with the complex, military-grade algorithm from the late 1990s. After weeks of effort, her team managed to crack it. Unpacking the file revealed it was not text, but a compressed video file. The timestamp embedded in the data was from August 12, 1997. They played the video. The quality was grainy, VHS grade. It showed the interior of a trailer that no longer existed on the property, the original NIDS National Institute for Discovery Science Mobile Command Center from the first scientific investigation of the ranch. The camera was fixed, showing a bank of old CRT monitors and a metal desk. A man in a polo shirt, his back to the camera, was speaking on a landline phone. His voice was clear. Confirmed, the object descended below the tree line at the eastern ridge and did not reappear. We have a team en route now. Photographic evidence is conclusive. This is not a balloon, an aircraft. We are calling it an unidentified aerial phenomenon. Category 1. The man hung up, sighed, and turned around. It was Dr. James Chadwick, the original lead investigator for the 1990s team. He walked to the desk, picked up a paper file, and began reading. The video continued for another 45 seconds of mundane activity before cutting to static. The file ended. Priya and her team were baffled. Why would this specific, mundane clip from 1997 spontaneously generate on their server in 2020? They dug into the archives. They found the original mission logs from August 12, 1997. The log entry matched the phone call in the video exactly, but there was no mention of any video being taken inside the trailer that day. They tracked down retired Dr. Chadwick. When shown the video, he went pale. He confirmed the events were accurate, the trailer layout correct, even the shirt he was wearing that day. But I never saw that camera, he said. We didn't have a fixed camera in that position, and we certainly didn't film routine phone calls. This is impossible. The recurrence file became a terrifying puzzle. It was a piece of the past, a memory the ranch itself, or something within it had somehow recorded, and was now playing back into the modern digital system for reasons unknown. Then, a month later, a second packet appeared. Same size, same encryption. This one held an audio file. The timestamp was 2004. It was a recording of a two-way radio transmission between a security patrol and the command center. The patrol reported seeing a large, dark shape, low to the ground, moving toward the homestead. The command center lost contact mid-sentence with a burst of screeching static. The static lasted for 30 seconds. But in this newly appeared file, the static was different. When cleaned and enhanced, the static resolved into a faint, but discernible pattern. It was a voice, whispering numbers in reverse order, followed by the latitude and longitude coordinates of the ranch's command bunker itself. Coordinates that were not publicly known in 2004. Priya's team now realized they weren't just receiving random recordings. They were receiving edited versions of the past. Versions that contained data whispers and static, in-scene camera angles that should not have existed. It was as if a hidden, omnipresent observer from those moments was now inserting its own footnotes into history's ledger. The third and most devastating recurrence happened in March of 2021. The server's intrusion detection system screamed an alert at 3:33 am. A data packet, 1.3 megabytes, had appeared, but this time, it didn't go to a temporary directory. It overwrote a critical system file, the one controlling the building's environmental systems and internal security locks. Before Priya's team could isolate it, the packet executed. Every light in the operations building went out, replaced by the pulsing red glow of emergency strips. A deep, subsonic hum vibrated through the structure. And then, from every intercom speaker, in every room and hallway, the audio from the 1997 video began to play. Dr. Chadwick's voice echoed through the darkened building. Confirmed, the object descended below the tree line. This is not a balloon, an aircraft. But it was different, slower, distorted, and as it played, the video file projected itself on every single computer monitor, television screen, and smartphone in the building. The grainy footage of the 1997 trailer played on 100 modern screens. And then, the footage changed. In the original video, Chadwick turns and reads a file. In this corrupted recurrence, he still turns. But his face is a blurred smudge. And he doesn't pick up a file. He looks directly into the camera that was never supposed to be there, and his distorted mouth opens. A new voice, a layered, harmonic whisper that is not his, issues from every speaker in unison. Then, silence. The lights returned. The systems rebooted. The packet was gone, leaving no trace of its code. But it had left a message, not in the data, but in the physical world. When the staff mustered in the central area, They found that all the exterior doors, steel reinforced and digitally locked, were standing wide open. The security log showed they had all unlocked and opened simultaneously at the moment the distorted voice spoke. Not forced open, unlocked, with the correct administrative codes. Codes that only 3 people possessed, none of whom had issued the command. The official incident report is a masterclass in understatement. Directed cyber-physical intrusion via anomalous data packet. Source: unknown. Method: unknown. Intent: communicative and demonstrative. All research was suspended for 72 hours. A thorough sweep found no conventional malware, no hackers, no system vulnerability. The recurrence proved one thing definitively: the phenomenon was not confined to electromagnetic fields or physical manifestations. It was in their data streams, it was in their past, and it was learning how to use their own technology, not to break it, but to speak through it. It had reviewed 25 years of human observation and had issued an eviction notice. Priya Sharma oversaw the creation of a new, air-gapped server system, physically disconnected from all networks. The old server cluster was kept running in a quarantined state, a digital lobster trap. To this day, the 1.3 megabyte packet still appears in it at random intervals. The video is always the same 1997 clip, but now, when Dr. Chadwick turns to the camera, his face remains a blur, and the length of the static after the phone call varies. When analyzed, that static always contains new data, snippets of recent, private conversations held in the command center, or grainy images of the current research team, taken from angles where no camera exists. It is no longer replaying the past, it is broadcasting the present, back at them, as if to say, we are still reviewing. The interface remains. The last photograph. Dr. Robert Kearns was a veteran of the ranch. A parapsychologist by training, he had been part of the research team longer than anyone else, arriving in 2008 and staying through every management change, every new theory, every wave of terrified resignations. He was the institutional memory, a man who had seen it all: orbs, shapeshifters, electromagnetic ghosts, time slips. His coping mechanism was documentation. He maintained a private, physical archive, not digital, of every odd event, filled with photographs, handwritten notes, and sketches. He believed, fundamentally, that the phenomenon had a pattern, a purpose beneath the chaos, and he was determined to find it before he retired or it broke him. By 2022, he was the last of the old guard. His theory, refined over 14 years, was that the ranch was not a haunted place, but a surgical site. He believed the various entities and anomalies were not native, but were attracted to a persistent, low-grade wound in reality that existed there, a wound that occasionally leaked strange energies, and, more importantly, allowed things from elsewhere to perceive our world. He called it the Lambertian aperture, after a theoretical physics concept. His colleagues considered it a poetic, if unprovable, metaphor. In his final month on the project, Kearns decided on one last experiment. He wanted a baseline image of the aperture at its most dormant. He chose a location he had long suspected was the epicenter, a flat, circular depression in the earth in the northeast sector, devoid of vegetation, which the team called the blister. Historical aerial photos showed it had been there, unchanged in size, since at least the 1940s. He would use a full-spectrum camera, capable of capturing ultraviolet and infrared light, and take a single, long-exposure photograph at midnight, a time when anomalous activity was often high. He wanted to see if the wound had a visible signature when it wasn't actively manifesting. He did not tell the security detail his full plan. He signed out for a routine atmospheric measurement at the blister. He carried his camera, a sturdy tripod, and a powerful flashlight. The night was clear and still, the silence profound. He set up the tripod at the edge of the depression, pointed the camera at its center, and set the exposure for 60 seconds. He would not look through the viewfinder. He would simply trigger the shutter and wait. At the moment he pressed the button, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The flashlight died. The silence became a vacuum, pressing in on his ears. Kearns felt a familiar dread, but also a resigned clarity. This is it, he thought. The baseline is active. He stood perfectly still for the 60-second exposure. In the pitch black, he heard sounds, a faint, metallic scraping from the ground, a whisper that seemed to come from multiple points around the depression, the sound of his own heartbeat roaring in his ears. He did not flee. He was a scientist taking a measurement. When the camera shutter clicked closed, the sound stopped. The flashlight flickered back on. The cold abated. He packed his equipment and walked back to the operations center, his gait steady, his mind already analyzing the anticipated data. He developed the photograph in his private, analog darkroom, no digital sensors to be corrupted. When he lifted the finished print from the chemical bath and held it under the safe light, his breath caught. The image was not of a barren depression. The long exposure had captured something the human eye could not see. The blister was glowing with a soft, internal radiance, a pale blue light that seemed to emanate from the soil itself. That was expected. Low-level Cherenkov radiation from particle decay was one of his hypotheses, but it was the figure in the photograph that made his blood run cold. Standing in the exact center of the blister was a humanoid shape. It was tall, vaguely masculine in outline, but composed of what appeared to be swirling, dark mist shot through with pinpricks of light, like a starfield given form. It was facing the camera, and it was not alone. Arrayed around it in the depression, faint and translucent, were other shapes. Kearns, with his decades of reviewing witness sketches, recognized them. The tall, thin observer from the canyon, the spindly, heat-sucking predator, the shimmering distortion of the walkers, the hulking, leathery shape from the hole. Dozens of them, all the major entities ever reported, were present in this one photograph, rendered in this strange, semi-transparent, star-filled essence. They were not manifesting. They were posed, like a family portrait. And in the foreground of the image, standing just outside the depression, was another figure. It was clear, solid, and unmistakably human. It was Robert Kearns himself, seen from behind, his hand still on the camera atop the tripod. He was captured in his own photograph at the moment he took it, but that was impossible. He had been alone. He studied the image of himself with a magnifying glass. The details were perfect, the tear in his jacket shoulder, the specific model of his watch. Then he saw it. His own stance was wrong. In the photo, his head was tilted, looking not at the camera controls, but slightly to the left, as if listening to something. And his shadow, cast by the non-existent moonlight, did not fall behind him. It stretched long and thin, directly toward the central star-filled entity, connecting them. Kearns sat in the darkroom for an hour, staring at the print. His theory was correct, and horrifically so. The ranch was a surgical site, but the entities were not random invaders. They were a coherent group, a hierarchy, and the photograph suggested they were aware of being observed on a level deeper than they had ever imagined. This was not a snapshot of a place. It was a snapshot of an ecology, an interconnected system, with the star-filled entity at its center. And it included him. He was not an observer outside the frame. He had been inside it all along. He filed his final report the next day. It contained no grand theory, no pages of analysis. It was a single sheet of paper. At the top was the case file number for his experiment. Beneath it, he had written only 3 lines. Hypothesis confirmed. The phenomenon is a singular, organized intelligence with multiple aspects. It is aware of the observation protocol. It has always been aware. The aperture is not a wound. It is an eye, and it is now open. He attached the photograph in a sealed envelope marked Eyes Only Project Director. He cleaned out his desk, said quiet goodbyes to a few colleagues, and drove off the property for the last time. The project director, upon viewing the photograph, ordered an immediate halt to all active, intrusive experiments. The focus shifted entirely to passive monitoring and containment. The photograph was analyzed by every available expert. The figure of Kearns was confirmed to be a true photographic element, not a double exposure or manipulation. The star field composition of the entities defied material analysis. The stars corresponded to no known stellar patterns, but their arrangement was not random. It was a complex, repeating fractal. Robert Kearns retired to a small home in Oregon. He gave no interviews, but according to a former colleague who visited him once, he kept one copy of the photograph. It was not in his study. It was in a simple frame on his nightstand. When asked why he would keep such a disturbing image so close, Kearns reportedly smiled a thin, weary smile. "To remember the moment, I realized I wasn't just studying the specimen," he said. "I was the specimen in the adjoining jar, and the light I thought was coming from my microscope was coming from theirs." Security logs from the ranch showed that for several months after Kearns' departure, the motion sensors around the blister would activate at random times. The cameras would show nothing, but the audio feeds, when enhanced, would sometimes pick up a faint, rhythmic sound. It was the steady, mechanical click of a camera shutter, opening and closing, as if something was practicing. For nearly 3 hours, we have presented evidence, not rumors, not folklore, not the unverified tales of a lonely highway. These are incidents drawn from police reports, declassified government documents, sworn eyewitness testimony, and the internal case files of the most dedicated paranormal research effort in modern history. The story of Skinwalker Ranch is not a single horror, but a mosaic of dread, each piece verified, each fragment pointing to a larger, more disturbing picture. We have walked with Michael Evans through the impossible geometry of the 30-mile canyon, where space itself becomes a trap, and a silent observer watches from the rim. We have stood with Dr. Eleanor Shaw as something learned to wear a human voice, practicing its imitation just outside the door. We have seen the legacy of the Sherman family's hole, an interface to something buried deep, that predates all modern investigation. We have followed Tom Gunderson's futile hunt for an invisible predator that harvests living tissue with surgical, terrifying precision. We have decoded Lena Petrov's malicious signal broadcasts, proving an intelligence deep in the earth that is aware, communicative, and retaliatory. We have peered through Dr. Reese Thorne's window into 1894, and received a warning passed hand to hand across a century. We have watched Ryan Chen's AI track phantoms of heat and cold, and in trying to understand them, may have set something free. We have uncovered Maya Flores's unfound room, the bricked-up tomb of a 1950 seconds failure that proved the phenomenon was waiting long before we arrived. We have listened to the land through Walter Briggs, the custodian who spoke a language older than history, and who vanished when his role was complete. We have been evicted by the Recurrence, a digital ghost from the past that learned to speak through our own servers. And finally, we have seen Dr. Robert Kearns's last photograph, a family portrait of the impossible, a hierarchy of horrors, with the observer himself included in the frame. So, what is the verified conclusion? This is not a haunting. The evidence does not support the idea of residual echoes or lost souls. This is not about extraterrestrials in the classic sense, though the implications are cosmic in scale. The testimony of ranchers, scientists, soldiers, and engineers corroborated across decades paints a consistent portrait of an intelligent, adaptive, and deeply embedded phenomenon. It manipulates space-time. It breaches barriers between what we call the past, present, and future. It learns our technology, mimics our forms, and studies our behavior with a clinical, often menacing, curiosity. It is an ecology of the absurd, thriving in a 512-acre laboratory where the laws of physics are merely suggestions. The true horror of Skinwalker Ranch is its coherence. The entities are not separate. The events are not random. They are facets of a single, unsettling reality. We are not alone on this planet. And what shares this land with us operates from a set of rules we are only beginning to glimpse, from motivations we may never fully comprehend. It is a reminder that our understanding of the world is a thin veneer, and beneath it lies a reality far stranger and far more dangerous than we have dared to imagine. If you take one thing from this documentary, let it be this: trust the data, trust the corroboration. The witnesses were not unreliable. Their tools were not faulty. They were confronting something that exists in the gaps of our perception, something verified. Now, your role begins. Subscribe to Verified Nightmare. In a world where these stories are documented fact, awareness is your first and only line of defense. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. We are your source for the verified truth in a landscape of uncertainty. Like this video. This documentary represents thousands of hours of research and synthesis. Your like boosts its visibility, helping other truth seekers find this channel and this evidence. Comment below. We actively investigate viewer accounts. Your own strange experience, no matter how small, could be a crucial piece of a larger puzzle. Every detail matters. This has been a comprehensive report on the verified horrors of Skinwalker Ranch. Remember, the most profound mysteries are not always in the distant stars. Sometimes, they are in the soil beneath our feet, in the silence of a Utah night, in the static between channels, waiting for a moment of weakness in the light we shine upon them. This is Verified Nightmare. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and above all, stay safe.